artificial intelligence. Now we are going to talk about terrorism. When we have envisaged this meeting, the title was, Is Terrorism Still a Threat? And we realized rapidly, this was before the events in between Israel and Hamas. And then we have decided to change the title because now the terrorist threat is there. And we have seen that after the defeat of Daesh, there was, at least in the public debate, the impression that terrorism was not anymore a threat that of the same relevance as it was before. In fact, it is not like that, because even if terrorist actions were certainly in a phase in which the activity had diminished, it is clear that in many parts around us, in the so-called enlarged Mediterranean, there were terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, other jihadist groups, were well present, were performing their terrorist activities in the areas where they were located, with many damages to the local population, and with the possibility for them to reorganize in order to be ready to launch terrorist attacks also in the West, and particularly in Europe. This is the case, for instance, in the Sahel, where in many areas there are the presence of these terrorist groups. In the Sahel, in a situation where the state of a failure or progress to failure of a number of states was giving room to this kind of presence, taking also advantage of some local dynamics. For instance, the revival of Tuareg awareness, or in countries like Somalia, taking advantage of the ethnic and tribal rivalries which were present in the country. Then we have seen that there has been a number of coup d'etat, which were not the cause, but we can say the symptom and the expression of this situation of lack of capability of governance in territories where terrorism was implanting itself. In addition to this, we have seen the increasing presence of Russian mercenaries, which have also a destabilizing effect in the region. Well, all this was happening before the events on the 7th of October, when we have seen the horrific terrorist attacks of Hamas against Israeli civilians. And now we are in the context of an Israeli reaction according to his rights of self-defense. And we know that in this context, the terrorist activities outside the area, and in particular in Europe, can develop. We have seen already this in France and in Belgium, but it's possible that this will increase even more. We have in our countries large Muslim presence. These Muslim presence, differently than what is often said, are in their very large majority integrated in the countries where they are, but there are in any case some fringes, especially among the youth, who are in some way marginalized, or they feel themselves marginalized, and they can be let's say they can give the possibility to process of radicalization, among which terrorists can be recruited. And we have seen that often those perpetrating terrorist acts are people belonging to these fringes of the Muslim minorities in our countries. We see also that there is a context of rivalries and emulation among the different terrorist groups, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others, and this can fuel an escalation in their violence. Of course, now we have to see what will happen in the region, in the Middle East, what will be the modalities of the Israeli reaction. We are worried about the possibility of an escalation of the conflict, which can increase the possibilities of terrorist threats. And I think that the response to our terrorist threats should be multifaceted, in the sense that there should be prevention, and in this prevention should be included also a better way of integrating those who are or feel not to be sufficiently integrated in our societies. There should be repression, of course, of terrorist activities, but there should also be an activity aiming at tackling and trying to solve the situations of crisis from where these terrorist activities are in some way determined or supported or fueled or encouraged. And as far as the particular issue of the Middle East, of course, it will be important to issue the question of the Palestinian statehood, which is one of the causes of what happened there. We have other situations of crisis in this enlarged Mediterranean, in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, in Central Asia. And if on our part as a European we can contribute to prevent this threat, I think we should do that in a more effective way in trying to manage this crisis and, if possible, to solve them. We understand that this is very difficult. We have to work in close coordination with our American allies, and we have to work as much as possible with the countries of the regions, with the Arab countries in particular. We have also to work in the international organizations. Consider also that while Russia is a factor of instability in Europe and also there, we have to understand how much we can entertain a dialogue with the power which is increasing its influence also in the region, that is China. And of course, all these are issues that have to be discussed. As you are aware, perhaps tomorrow there will be a European Council in Brussels, and this issue, I understand, will be discussed. So I will not take more of your time, and I would like to introduce the members of this panel. We have Prefetto Alessandra Guidi. She is the Deputy Director General of the Department of Information for Security of Italy. She has been a Deputy Chief of Police, and she has been Prefetto. I don't know how to translate Prefetto in English. Huh? Okay, this is an ancient Roman title, so in Latin was Prefectus, in Italian it's Prefetto, and it is the chief of the of the government in a certain province. So she's been prefetto of Arezzo, prefetto of Florence, and as I said, now she's Deputy Director General of the Department of Information for Security. Then we have Professor Valentine, or Valentina, I don't know if it's Valentine or Valentina Lomellini. She's a professor of History of International Relations. She is a fellow in several British and American universities, and she's an expert on the issue that we are going to deal. Then we have Dr. Lucio Pifferi of the International Counter-Terrorism Office of the Central Directorate of Prevention Police. We have Dr. Charles Asher-Small. I don't know if he's with us. He's with us? Okay, Professor. Okay, welcome. Very well. He's a fellow in several universities also, both in the United Kingdom and in Israel. And he has dealt at length with issues concerning anti-Semitism in different parts of the world. Then there is my colleague and friend, Ambassador Stefano Stefanini. He has been the Italian ambassador, permanent representative to NATO. He has been diplomatic advisor of the President of the Republic, Giorgio Napolitano, and he has served in different countries, notably Australia, Russia, and the United States. So, first of all, I will give the floor to Prefetto Alessandra Guidi. Please, Prefetto.
Sì, mi sentite? Sì. Thank you for the invitation, and it actually doesn't make much sense to ask ourselves if terrorism is still a threat, although in truth, from our perspective as intelligence, we have never stopped considering it as such. But what has happened in the last weeks leads us to recalibrate and ask ourselves what is the current picture of the terrorist threat, and what kind of impact have the crisis in Gaza and the recent attacks in Europe on the threat in our countries. Let's make a step back, trying to analyze the situation before the most recent events and comparing it with the current situation. We should distinguish between the threat coming from abroad and the threat already present within our countries and our societies. Concerning the jihadist threat already present within our countries, because we have to distinguish between the threat coming from abroad and the threat already present within our countries. So, concerning the threat already present in Italy and in Europe, it mainly comes from individuals and small groups. And the wide range of individual and small group that could pose a risk is extremely diversified. Just to provide some examples, it is composed more and more of young people, in some cases even connected in networks, who radicalize online. Returnees from Syria and Iraq, who have been incarcerated. Radicalized individuals who tried in the past to reach the so-called caliphate, but did not succeed. A number of individuals, both nationals and foreigners, who develop frustration and resentment towards our societies, national governments, and more in general, the Western world. The variety of the picture increases the risk of the so-called lone actors, and it's not easy to detect timely early signs of alert. In the activation of these individuals, the web and the terrorist propaganda still play a key role. And this shows once again how relevant is the online sphere and how important is investing and improving our capabilities to implement prevention activities in that specific environment. As you can easily guess, such characteristics make the threat hard to investigate and difficult to detect and prevent. In this regard, it becomes essential to strengthen the rules of engagement and intelligence tools. In fact, digital domain by its nature makes it difficult to identify and neutralize points of attack. I would just to spend a few words on youth. It's increasing the number of very young people who either start or advance in a radicalization process, almost always online and via social media. It's urgent to ask ourselves why this is happening and what should be done to address this phenomenon. We struggle to understand the youth world, how they communicate, and what plays a key role in their radicalization processes. I would like now to pass to refer to the threat coming from abroad. The big brands of terrorist organization, Al-Qaeda and Daesh, are in a reorganization phase. Both have decentralized their activities. Al-Qaeda exploits local crises to root its presence, and in the competition with Daesh, continues to use the online sphere to recruit, circulate propaganda, and incite to commit violent actions. Daesh, after the military defeat in Syria and Iraq, has reallocated its presence in other areas of the world, especially in Africa, in the Sahel area, and in Central Asia, in Afghanistan. The political stability of the region is key to prevent terrorism. The military coup in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have already led to an increased activism of terrorist groups in those areas. If we intend to counter the jihadist violence in the Sahel, the EU should carry forward a policy aimed at stabilizing the whole region, both at political and economic level, including through infrastructural investments. Such investments, in fact, are strategically crucial for the EU, as they help to prevent that foreign actors intervene in such sensitive domain. I would like to draw your attention that the Afghan branch of the Islamic State, known as the Islamic State in Khorasan province, is currently the main jihadi threat at the global level because of its offensive potential, growing activism, and ability to attract new members and sympathizers in various countries. And last but not least, its transnational aspirations. The growing media and operational capabilities of the Islamic State in Khorasan province could inspire new lone wolves to carry out hostile actions in Europe. I don't see you anymore, but I don't know if you can hear me.
We can see you. We can see you.
Okay, I see you now. And in the medium term, Islamic State could even try to carry out high-impact attacks in Western countries as well as against their national interests abroad. The Hamas attack against the State of Israel risks to work as a detonator for the global jihadism. And in this direction go the Hamas leaders and former leaders' statements and calls to fight, addressing not only the Palestinian population but all the Muslim population. In such a context, even though at national level we do not have clear indications of an imminent threat to our country, terrorist organizations may exploit the ongoing crisis, pushing the fight beyond the Israel-Palestine geographical context. This can lead to the risk that individuals or small groups commit violent or terrorist acts in Italy and in Europe, as shown by the recent terrorist attacks in France and Brussels. The attack in Brussels confirms that we cannot approach the phenomenon just using the national perspective. The author of the Brussels attack had contacts with Italy. He entered illegally in our country in 2011, and after traveling across Europe for a while, he passed to action in Belgium. The terrorist threat for one of the EU member states is clearly also a threat for the other EU member states. This means that we have to improve cooperation, info sharing, and implement measures such as expulsion in order to ensure security in Europe. Today is the news of a new bill from the German government to make expulsions more effective, but I underline how, although we are in a field of national sovereignty, a coordinated strategy among the European countries on these issues is necessary if we want to think in terms of security of the whole European community. This strategy, as I'm going to better explain later, must be combined to a strategy for preventing radicalization through a multi-level approach that includes social and economic measures to facilitate integration. The Palestinian conflict could also produce negative effects on the extremist left-wing activism, as proved by the revitalization of anti-militarist, anti-imperialist, and anti-NATO campaigns in the national context. The crisis may indeed reduce the distance between different left-wing extremist movements, including the ones more prone to use violence, such as the insurrectional anarchist movements. Concerning the pro-Palestine initiatives that have taken place in the national context the week after the attack to Israel, we have seen a number of protests in different cities, all aimed to express support to the Palestinian population and condemn the Israeli intervention. We have to be vigilant and avoid that such protests are exploited and turn to violence, but in the same time, we must avoid an unnecessary limitation of the right to demonstrate, as it could have negative effects on public order and could be exploited by anti-government movements. In conclusion, I would like to draw your attention on the following 2 points. The first, what to do. Italy has developed tools in the fight against terrorism, as proved by the positive results achieved in the past in this area. Info sharing between law enforcement and intelligence is a winning recipe, and it would be useful that it could be adopted by other countries, as we often suggested in the international fora. The second one is the critical aspects. Italy is no longer just a transit country. We need to combine at the same time measures aimed both to prevent radicalization and counter-terrorism, as well as policies to improve integration. In fact, radicalization processes are often triggered by social disease and marginalization. We should also improve and strengthen at the national and international level our capabilities to monitor the digital field. Today, passive defense on targets in cyberspace is no longer enough. We must secure the digital access. In this regard, our country has to make an extra effort from a technological and cultural point of view keeping in mind that human intelligence has to be the main driver of every strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prefetto. I think that you rightly mentioned the experience that Italy has in the fight against terrorism and the success that we had in our country some decades ago. You also rightly mentioned that there are the terrorist activities which can develop connected to what is the international situation and the crises which are present in our neighborhood, and also the insurrectional activities which can be not directly connected with terrorism, but which can create problems to public order and to the life of the citizens. Perhaps there is also to put a watch to the spreading of a phenomenon like anti-Semitism, which can come on. Also on a phenomenon of Islamophobia, which can also be present and fuel tensions. And also we have to watch, we have seen in the United States, in particular in Europe, we had it in something in the past, the terrorism conducted by white supremacist groups, which at the same time profess anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And these are also factors of tensions in our countries. So now I will give the floor to Dr. Pifferi. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, the investigative activities and intelligence acquisition developed in the recent period confirmed the persistence of a religious terrorist threat towards our country, which remains, even without specific signs, a potential target of the hostility of jihadist circuits. Significant are some factors that represent structural risk situation capable of keeping the Islamic threat constant and rooted. In particular, the following are of importance. The effect of the dynamics of foreign crisis conflict scenarios, where a deterioration of the security framework is obvious, in particular in the Sahel area, with forms of operational relaunch by jihadist groups networks, even in countries where Italy is committed to providing its contribution to stability activity. The ability of Daesh media channels to exercise relentless anti-Western threatening propaganda. In our country, we have seen several chats animated by increasingly younger Italian-speaking internet users, drawn by the Daesh propaganda capable of exercising forms of proselytism and ideological religious conditioning with operational implications. The presence of symbols of Christianity, frequently evoked by jihadist propaganda. An example is the constant circulation on social accounts and or media channels referable to the jihadist circuits of posters having the city of Rome and the Vatican as their target. The possibility that Western foreign fighters, further radicalized and stronger due to their war experience, return to their countries of origin, including Italy, also taking advantage of the present irregular migratory routes. The proven links between our country and some of the executors of terrorist attacks carried out in Europe, as well as the presence of individuals involved in jihadist contexts and in some circumstances identified and blocked before they took action. The potential critical issues connected to the presence in urban areas of degradation and marginality situation, with dominant presence of foreign citizens more easily attacked by forms of anti-system propaganda in terms of radical religious extremism with violent tendencies. A place of aggregation, such as reception centers and or repatriation detention centers, CPR, which could become a driving force for violent radicalization process. As for the global context, Daesh, despite the suffered defeats, continues to represent the main reference for the jihadist audience, managing to compensate for moments of military difficulty through non-stop spreading on its official media channels of propaganda messages on the need to start a war of erosion against the unbelieving enemy or against the countries of the international coalition. In this regard, Rome and the Vatican are the subject of various posters distributed on social accounts and/or media channels attributable to Daesh. The Afghan branch of Daesh, the Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISKP, at the moment could represent one of the most actual risks for European security, as confirmed by recent police operation with several arrests of militants from the aforementioned division. They are mainly of Central Asian origin, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and etc., who would have been the bearers of real hostile projects to be implemented in Turkey, Germany, and Holland. The Indo-Pakistani and South Asian region is also considered to be strongly destabilized by the new rise of the Taliban movement in Afghanistan and by the bloody conflict with the faction affiliated to the Islamic State, which violently contend for power. The threat stemming from the Asian quadrant, although seemingly characterized by a territorial dimension, is also projected and looms over the European territory where operational offshoots of Al-Qaeda's origin are radiating. In fact, members of the Pakistani diaspora also represented a risk for national security. In this perspective, the investigation by the Digos of Genoa, which revealed the existence of a structured organization made up of 14 Pakistanis, so-called Kabar Group, arrested on 7 June 2022, have been convicted to more than 4 years of imprisonment for participating in an association with the aim of international terrorism, inspired by the radical ideology of the TLP, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan movement, already declared a terrorist organization by the Islamabad government in April 2021. The Balkan area also remains an incubator of the terrorist threat towards Europe due to the possible risk of emulation by Islamic extremists present in the European continent. At national level, the arrest in November 2021 in Milan of the Italian Kosovar extremist Leona Tafallari, sentenced on the 1st March to 4 years for association with the purpose of international terrorism, fits into this context. In this regard, it is useful to underline the no longer marginal role of women in the logistical operational dynamics of jihadist organization. In fact, female figures are gradually taking on key roles in carrying out activities ranging from indoctrination and online recruitment to the creation and dissemination of propaganda material in support of the Mujahideen brothers, to economic assistance to groups or cells in European territory and or in war zones, also resorting to money transfer and crowdfunding channels. The conflict that broke out on February the 24th, 2022 in Ukraine also contributes to increasing the threat linked to religious terrorism. As expected, the serious military crisis was immediately the object of interest of the media apparatus that supports the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda organization. Furthermore, the conflict has inevitably made the Eastern European border more penetrable, also Poland, facilitating the transit of potential terrorists coming from Southeast Asia and linked to the aforementioned ISKP network. Another area that aroused great concern in the African one is the African one, which in recent years has become the chosen location of the two main terrorist networks, IS and Al-Qaeda, which in some regions, the Sahel in particular, have highlighted a significant military capacity, often acting in a competitive perspective which testifies even more the weakness of those states. The drop of security conditions in Africa makes the pressure applied on the southern shore of the Mediterranean even more dramatic, also in light of the serious internal instability of Tunisia and Libya. Here, groups from crisis area are exposed to the activism of jihadist militants, masses of desperate people intending to reach Europe, and the intensification of landings on our coast constitutes a potential issue of exposure for national security, considering the possible presence of subjects linked to or close to the jihadist movement. In this sense, the role of the Anti-Terrorism Strategic Analysis Committee, CASA, is significant as it allows for the timely, in-depth studies on the data provided by the intelligence sector to verify the threats relating to potentially dangerous individuals who have landed in Italy or intend to do so, and adopt appropriate safety initiatives. In the face of this phenomenon, the activity carried out by the Border Office and DIGOS present at local level of migrants from North Africa is of considerable importance and to date, with the distribution of arrivals throughout the national territory. It's not only the responsibility of the Southern Maritime Border Province. The recent escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, still in full progress, stand as a factor in relaunching the global jihadist phenomenon in consideration of the common anti-Zionist matrix of the radical Islamist members, also with unpredictable repercussions throughout the West. The picture described makes it clear how the jihadist threat today is an existing danger for the West, making it necessary for the local offices to maintain good practices that allow to effectively monitor the radical circuits with the use of a working methodology strategically based on the prevention system of the risks associated with international jihadist terrorism. As mentioned before, at central level, this approach represents the institutional mission of the Anti-Terrorism Strategic Analysis Committee, CASA, a collegial body in which the anti-terrorism units of the police force and the intelligence agency work in perfect synergy. For this reason, over the years, it has become the main asset for sharing and analyzing information related to the terrorist threat. In the CASA context, in addition to the international crisis scenarios prone to repercussions in Europe and consequently on the national territory, phenomena which have an impact on the security system are examined, as well as dangerous profiles of individuals emerging from info-investigative contexts or as a result of international intelligence or police cooperation, with implementation of measures such as those provided for a European level, such as the entry ban to the European Union or special surveillance of person for investigation and surveillance of person for national security investigation. Since 2015 to this day, 714 individuals have been expelled from Italy for national security reasons connected to the terrorism. Furthermore, CASA, with the key role of the penitentiary department, has developed the required information exchanges for the identification of risk indicators and management parameters for radicalized prisoners or those in the process of radicalization. The measures to be adopted following the served sentence are subject of constant discussion to identify, also involving local authorities, the solution that can guarantee suitable safety conditions. This activity is carried out in particular with regard to foreign citizens when difficulties arise in relation to their removal from the national territory, which remains the main goal. We also remember the importance of the legislation regarding the possibility of revoking Italian citizenship in the event of a definitive conviction for terrorism, which, until now, has been applied in 3 cases. Thank you for your attention. Grazie.
Thank you, Dr. Pifferi. I think that you stressed some important points. One is the role of the social media in the process of radicalization, and also the effects that can have on this phenomenon the centers of detention, both prisons or other centers of detention where radicalization can increase. And also you stress the importance of and the effectiveness of the cooperation at European level in identifying possible potential terrorists and enacting accordingly. Now, I would like to give the floor, if she's ready, to Dr. Valentina Lomellini, please. You can intervene.
Yeah, good afternoon. Do you hear me? I don't think that you
Yes, yes, it's fine. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to join this session, even if virtually. Unfortunately, I cannot come to Rome, but anyway, I'm glad to be here. So first of all, I think that when we talk about terrorism, we must always bear in mind that we are talking about a cyclic phenomenon, which has characterized the human history since its very earliest beginnings. So I don't want to go, into much details, but just to give some food for thought. So we must remember that in ancient history, we had the earliest forms of terrorism that were those related to the sicari and the assassins, who practiced selective killings. Moving on to the modern age, we have the French Revolution, which certainly played an important role in redefining the meaning of the words terror and terrorism. And even later, from the 19th century onwards, so we have various forms of terrorism, including international terrorism, that cause actually the death of civilians, but also of prominent figures. So just remember, the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which actually started the First World War. So from that moment onward, it was quite clear that terrorism became a very powerful political tool in international relations. So dealing with the modern age and the contemporary age, I would like to mention, because it's a very important cornerstone in the so-called terrorism studies, the theory portrayed by David Rappaport, who tried to conceptualize the periodization of terrorism into waves, distinguishing them into anarchist, anti-colonial, new left, and so the latest one, the religious one. So I would like to, add a couple of remarks about this theoretization, which I said it is still the cornerstone of the so-called terrorism studies. So thinking about terrorism from a scientific perspective, but I do hope that also, this scientific perspective could help, the analysts and the policymakers, we can explain terrorism into waves, which involve phases of expansion and contraction. So in the phase of contraction, we witness, and that's what I would like to add, a peculiar phenomenon. So actually the oblivion that envelops the memory of terrorism. So public opinion basically removes the problem. The media stops talking about the phenomenon and as if it never existed. And even worse, policy developments gradually slow down as the urgency of the terrorist threat seemed to recede. So that is to say that to a certain extent, at least at the European Union level, policymakers exclude terrorism from the most important political priorities in terms of security. That in the recent years. Let us also simply reflect on how research funding has evolved. So the ambitious ERC and also Horizon Europe program have excluded terrorism as a priority topic, with the sole exception of the focus on cyber terrorism, which is definitely a very important topic, but this is not the only one dealing with terrorism. So actually we have the evidence that terrorism did not simply disappear, but I would like to stress the point that probably it has simply undergone a change. What are these changes then? So first of all, terrorism has experienced a kind of downturn in the old continent and in the West in general, but still continues to pose a serious threat. So we must remember that in the last year, 2022, we had 28 completed, failed, or foiled attacks that were recorded in the Europe, basically in the European Union. 16 attacks were completed, and 4 people tragically lost their lives. 2 resulting from jihadist attacks, and 2 from a right-wing terrorist attack. EU member states continue to view jihadist terrorism as the most prominent threat in the EU. And actually, lone actors remain a key threat, as also my colleagues pointed out. The most part of the attacks carried out in 2022 were done so by suspects acting alone. So this is especially true, we must also add this point, for attacks motivated both by a jihadist ideology and right-wing extremism, which is the other major security threat to European states, but even in the United States. Second point, I think that there is another element of great importance, that is the relocation of the threat. So the 80% of terrorist attacks take place in non-European and non-Western territories. So in this regard, it is quite evident that terrorism suffers from the so-called traveling and borders problem. So public opinion does not tend to recognize and remember as terrorist events that have taken place in distant countries. Moreover, we must also say, I think, that the agenda, the media agenda, seems to have a direct influence on the setting of even government security priorities. So we had the COVID pandemic first, then we had the war in Ukraine, and these 2 events have reset the security agendas, causing people to forget terrorism, apart from, you know, the events of the 7th of October. With these regards, since the fact that I'm an historian, so I cannot predict the future, but still I can try to understand what is the past, we can say that this forgetting effect we are witnessing today is the same one European society were subjected to at the end of the Cold War. So between the 60s and the 80s, another type of international terrorism, the political nationalist terrorism, internationalized its struggle, exporting to Europe a terrorist wave that had a precedent, we must say, only in the anarchist wave at the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So it was Arab-Palestinian terrorism. Arab-Palestinian terrorism, that was licensed terrorism, coexisted together with religious terrorism throughout the 80s. The former in Europe, the latter in Middle East, when the former, so the Arab-Palestinian one, gradually faded and was partly absorbed by the latter. So as two almost isolated incidents in the 90s were almost forgotten by the public opinion. So the first terrorist attack against the World Trade Center in February 1993, and then 5 years later, in August 1998, the bombs that exploded the US embassies in Kenya and in Tanzania, killing more than 200 people and wounding more than 4,000 people. So actually, the attacks were later linked to the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. But when in September 11, we had the attacks on the Twin Tower and the Pentagons, actually, the world was surprised. So undoubtedly, the effect of 9/11 was not comparable, both with respect of the number of casualties and the psychological and media impact. However, it is a fact that the major Western leaders who intervened publicly to condemn the intervention, to condemn the terrorist attack, made no mention of the memory of a threat that had, bedeviled Europe for more than 2 decades. So we must keep this in mind in order to try to understand what would be the best answer to terrorism and what response has to be made to terrorism and what is still needed in terms of security policies. So it is true, as for example, Jörg Monar argued that there is no other example of a policy area moving so quickly and comprehensively to the centers of the treaties and to the top of the European Union political agenda than, the anti-terrorism security policy. And it is true also that, there was a kind of widening and deepening debate in security studies. So security is no longer just military security, but it concerns also terrorism and many other elements dealing with global security. But now we have, to keep in mind that we have to cope with a different phenomenon. So during the Cold War, we talk about a technomorphous period in which actually terrorists were state-sponsored. So states often financed, controlled, trained, and monitored, terrorists. So their strategy was quite rational, I would say. Today, we are currently experiences a kind of biomorphous stage that corresponds to the birth of entities proliferating in a quasi-biological way that are not usually controlled by state. And that's why, and I agree with Prefetto Guidi, they are very difficult to identify and even more to infiltrate. So we have, to consider this major change in the actorship of the terrorist threat on one side. And on the other side, just to make a comment and to answer to my colleagues' talks. So as an historian of terrorism, I must say I'm not predicting the future, but we are used to do analysis on archived documents and so empirical analysis. So in my opinion, if you would like to think about a new wave of terrorism or a new wave of terrorist attacks occurring after and before and because of the uprisings in Middle East and the Hamas horrifying terrorist attacks, we have to, wear the clothes of terrorists themselves. So what would be the purpose of pushing for a new wave of organized terrorist attacks in Europe? from Hamas point of view or from terrorist point of view. Actually, what we see in Europe, I mean, we are witnessing a wide attention given to the Palestinian cause. So from the point of view, in my opinion at least, from the point of view of Hamas or other organizations operating abroad, it will be definitely counterproductive from a political point of view to arouse a structured wave of attacks that would lead to a marked change in public attitudes. So I'm not sure that Middle East crisis will bring to a new wave of terrorism. But I think also that that will be, that is the best moment in which we can truly prevent this new terrorist uprising, as well as to plan effectively an anti-terrorist cooperation at the European level, but even more broadly at the Western level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think that is important what you stressed about the fact that most of terrorist attacks and also victims took place outside Europe. What we had in Europe, of course, has been much more relevant for us and for our public opinion. But terrorism is something that has been spread all over, the areas of crisis in the so-called enlarged Mediterranean and also in Asia, in the framework of struggle for powers within the Islamic world, with influence from external powers in what has happened. Then I think it's important also the fact that the attention of the public opinion has been reduced because many attacks have been prevented thanks to the experience that we have developed both at national and international level. So you mentioned some figures by which in front of a small number of attacks which have been effective, there has been a large number that have been avoided thanks to the activities of prevention. So now I would like to Professor Charles Asher-Small to take the floor. Please, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you able to hear me well? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm honored to be part of the conversation. I wish I was there in Rome, but I'm now in the United States and I'm unable to travel at this moment, but thank you for having me. And I'd like to thank Robert Hassan in particular for facilitating my participation. Listening to the previous speaker, I was wondering what would have happened during the French Revolution if there was a Twitter and TikTok during the French Revolution. What would the impact be on the outcome of history? That's the first question. I'm going to focus on issues of anti-Semitism. And many people would think, what does anti-Semitism have to do with the current situation and the threat of terror? And I would submit to you that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. Anti-Semitism is not a problem for Israel. Anti-Semitism is a problem for humanity, and it's a threat to the democracies of the world. Professor Elie Wiesel, the witness to the Holocaust, Nobel Peace Prize winner, professor, always taught that anti-Semitism may begin with Jewish people, and now it begins with Israel. But it does not end with the Jews or with Israel. Once this form of hatred is unleashed, it knows no boundaries and is a threat to democratic countries and to basic humanity. And we can see with the outbreak of this recent war, or the ongoing war, by political Islam, and I'm speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'm speaking about the Iranian revolutionary regime. They use anti-Semitism as the fuel to their ideology, the fuel to their reactionary social movement and their war on Europe, their war on democracy, and their war on human decency. Political Islam began 100 years ago with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt as a reaction to British colonialism. And the ideology fused the most pernicious forms of European genocidal anti-Semitism and Nazism and fascism with a very narrow understanding of Islam. I am not speaking about Islam in general or Muslims. I'm speaking about political Islam as defined by the Muslim Brotherhood. And this was the root of political Islam, and the ideology traveled through the Islamic world into the Shiite world and throughout the Sunni world. So Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Iranian revolutionary regime pays homage to the intellectuals that started the Muslim Brotherhood in the Sunni Egypt context. So what is the ideology of political Islam? Political Islam wants to rid the Islamic world of all that is the other, be it Jewish, be it Christian, be it moderate Muslim and other minorities. They do not recognize the other. They want to destroy the other. The ideology wants to destroy Israel because Israel is the only non-Muslim entity in the region. It's the only space in the so-called Islamic world in which Jewish people have self-determination and Jewish people are equal under the democratic laws of Israel with other Israelis, Muslim and Jewish, Muslim, Christian and Jewish. And from an Islamist perspective, from the perspective of Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, Daesh, ISIS, and the Muslim Brotherhood, a Muslim cannot be equal to a Christian or a Jew. They have to be higher. And what they would like to do is not only destroy the state of Israel, but destroy democracy. And they do it through an ideological battle, not just the battle on the kinetic battlefield, but the ideological battlefield. And again, they're using anti-Semitism to weaken the West. So another part of this onslaught against democracies is the regime in Qatar. The Qatari regime has an agreement with the Muslim Brotherhood. The royal family holds to all of the fatwas and all of the religious and legal rulings of the Muslim Brotherhood. Yosef Qaradawi, who lived in Qatar, as do the leaders of Hamas who committed the pogrom, who cheered, and the Qatari regime and the Hamas regime celebrated the murder of the 1,300 to 1,400 Israeli citizens. They celebrated the rape and the murder and the mutilation because this was part of the decolonization movement. And what Qatar is doing is basically they are the paymasters. They are the paymasters of Iran. They are the paymasters of Hamas. They are the paymasters of the Muslim Brotherhood. And in our research at the Institute, which I am the director, we have established the fact that the Qatari regime and the Muslim Brotherhood have access to over 1 trillion US dollars in assets. They buy banks, they buy major corporations, they own Heathrow Airport, they own the Empire State Building, they own Harrods, they are major shareholders in banks and major corporations in Europe. And what they have also done, and this should be, if you are concerned about terrorism in Europe, what they've also done has invested hundreds of billions of dollars in your finest universities. And they're using soft power to weaken European democracies. And if you do a poll with the young people in the audience who are young, brilliant, beautiful young Italians and students from all over the world, and ask them, what do they think of Israel, the only democracy in the region? And ask them what they think of Hamas. And you'll see young people in a democracy, some of which will be sympathetic to a regime that not only calls for the extermination of all Jewish people around the world, but they call for the subjugation of women. They call for the murder of homosexuals, and they do not recognize minority rights. The young Israelis that were celebrating in a music concert, a rave, and dancing through the night, that music is illegal in Gaza. That music is illegal in Iran. Think about it. And yet young people in Europe, young people in the United States are politically illiterate. More and more because of the influence of soft power in our education, where young Europeans and North Americans do not understand that a basic tenet of democracy is that we're all equal under one legal system, and that reactionary social movements that want to destroy democracy is a problem. And yet, in our intellectual environment of postmodernity and anti-colonialism and anti-Western hegemony, there is this red-green alliance that is emerging in our universities, in our best universities. And this is where young people learn to become citizens and professors and journalists and policy analysts and corporate leaders. And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to protect the integrity of democracy, then question, why is Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood funding your universities, and what are the impact of this? And as you know, and I'm sure the people on the panel know better than I, Italy in particular has a special relation with the funding of Qatar and Islamist funding coming into Italian institutions, more so than other European nations. So this is the ideological battle. And the ideological battle eventually turns into policy and turns into the kinetic battlefield. So this challenge of anti-Semitism is a very important, sensitive issue. It reawakens old hatreds in Europe, hatreds that not only killed 6 million Jews, but it devastated Europe. It destroyed its cities, it destroyed its culture, it destroyed the infrastructure. That once this hatred was unleashed, we know the cost that it takes on all of us, on all who live in European countries. So this war is being waged in our most important institutions, and I hope our policymakers take heed of these implications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. You are, first of all, right on saying that Semitism is not an issue which concerned only the Jews. It concerned, I think, everybody. Our society, especially we Europeans, Jews have been persecuted and marginalized in Europe for centuries. And historical also, we have to say that Jews expelled or escaping persecutions in Europe, they found along centuries refuge in the Ottoman Empire, where they could stay, prosper for a number of centuries. Then you had this phenomenon of political Islamism, especially in its more radical expressions, and on the ways how the Muslim Brotherhood developed, how the Salafist movements also developed in the Middle East and in Africa. And therefore, we are in the situation in which such forces have been certainly to be eradicated, in order that they cannot bring harm not only to Israel, but to all of us, I should say. At the same time, we have to be careful in separating these this terrorist group and their ideology from the fate of the Palestinians, which are also the victims of this jihadism, and we should find the way of having their statehood. Israel has been engaged in that. Then there has been events in Israel itself, which we had create situations in which the formation of a Palestinian state has not been possible. We hope that from this tragedy, the way to restart a process for having a two-state solution can be put in place. And I hope that also in Israel, as I know there are many people who are thinking in that way, this can finally be achieved. Well, now I give the floor to Ambassador Stefanini, please.
Grazie Maurizio. This is a huge topic, and you have already had a lot of information. So I shall be brief and take a different approach. Also, like Maurizio, I'm a diplomat, so the question in my mind is always what to do. Obviously, the subtext of this meeting, was until the 6th of October was, is there room for terrorism in a world which is dominated by great powers, competition, struggle, including war? I think on the 7th of October, we had the answer from Hamas. Terrorism is unfortunately, horrifically alive and kicking. The Hamas attack is different in some ways from many previous terrorism events that we've heard about it. Hamas blurs the line between traditional terrorism, terror, killing, and possibly images of killing as horrific as possible, because that's part of and a military operation, because that was a well-planned, well-executed military operation. So it also blurs the line between what we've called for a long time the terrorist movements, non-state actors and state actors. Terrorist movements have been used by powers and great powers as proxies. And one clear example is Hamas itself, which is supported and financed and most likely trained by Iran. You don't improvise operations like the one we've seen without some trainers who are prepared. But even, and then you have Hezbollah, which does terrorism and does many other things, which is an affiliation of Iran. But terrorist movements also in the past have been used everywhere by state powers to gain advantage, to create havoc, etc. What is happening now, and this is that the proxy relationship might, and this is what might revert, because the proxy, Hamas in this case, might create an escalation of conflict involving state powers. So you have the proxy that triggers a state. We don't know if it's going to happen. All diplomatic efforts by many countries are just focused on preventing an escalation of the conflict, but it might happen. And let me leave with just, I'd like just to leave with some questions that you made, some food for thought for all of you, about the 3-4 terrorism-related concerns that have arisen in the wake of the October 7 attack. The first one is obviously can Hamas be defeated? This is what Israel has declared, that he wants to defeat, eradicate, eliminate Hamas. Can it be done? And how? Is it possible with a military operation? Or this is really a major issue. And the reason why the expected ground operation has not taken place until now is because the Israelis, for many reasons, because of the hostages, because of the civilian population, because pressures from outside on Israel to delay, maybe disagreement within Israel on how to conduct the operation. There are many reasons, but the bottom line question is, can Hamas be militarily defeated? And then, if and when it is militarily defeated, what happens next? We've heard yesterday, I think, French President Macron that evoked an international coalition against Hamas. Again, can it be done? The second issue is whether the conflict can be contained. It's already a large conflict. There are already thousands of people who have died, most of them civilians, Israelis and Palestinians, and that's bad enough. But can it be contained, or will it spread? And if it's escalate and spread to the northern border of Israel with Lebanon and with Syria, and or in the West Bank, it would be again a mix of military and terrorism and counter-terrorism conflict. Third question is, what impact is this going to have on the galaxy of terrorist movements? Because Daesh, like we say, has been defeated in the sense that the Islamic State in Rafah is no more, but ISIS is still operating with cells, and Al-Qaeda has been defeated, but you have Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, you have Al-Shabaab in Somalia, you have Al-Qaeda in the Indian continent. So the franchises of terrorism are spread over. Is what is happening in the Middle East going to have an effect on them, considering that what is happening in the Middle East is, yes, it is terrorism, but it is terrorism that is also riding a national cause, the Palestinian issue. And last but not least, obviously, something which for us living in Italy, in Europe, and in the West in general, is this going to have an effect? Is there going to be a rebound of what we call domestic terrorism, considering that it doesn't take much to organize? Any of us can become a terrorist. We only need to drive something, and we can become a terrorist. So I think these are the questions that we, your generation, will have to deal with, because they're not going to be solved in a matter of weeks or months. Thank you.
Very well. I think that we have now room for questions and comments on your side. So I don't know who would like to take the floor. I have already two. Please, Can you can come here, please.
I'm Valerio, I'm a GG student from Italy. My question is regarding what was previously said about, it's actually two questions probably. First of all, regarding the wave of Palestinian terrorism in the 80s in Europe and especially in the Middle East. My question was, in your opinion, could we have done more in that moment in terms of mediation between the parts involved in order to prevent future attacks from happening rather than just condemn and react to the ones that already happened? Because we also need to remember that Hamas himself was born in the 80s as a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it was basically fueled by the conflicts, of course, going on between Palestine and Israel. So my question is, could we have done more to maybe even prevent Hamas from coming to be as an organization, or at least to being what it is now, by mediating between the parts, and could we do more now in order to prevent future acts from happening and to also prevent the very violent repercussions and retaliations? Thank you.
Well, I will say a few words about it. Then I don't know if my colleagues would like to add something. If I have well understood your question, is what can we do to prevent the spread of this wave of terrorism from Hamas? I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but we have to take into account the fact that an extension of the conflict can give the possibility to Hamas to spread this terrorism everywhere, let's say in Europe, with the support of other powers which will be part of this conflict. So I think that the emphasis put by both President Biden and the European leaders to avoid an extension of the conflict, and to ask also to Israel to do in sort that in their right of self-defense, they do not, let's say, create situation in which this will be more possible, I think is correct in order to isolate as much as possible Hamas and be able to reduce its capabilities to hit and to go along with their terrorist activities. I don't know if you want to add something on this, or others who are in the panel. Anybody want to jump on it from our side? Okay, so there is another question, please. You're still there, both professors. Are you still there? Sono andati questi. Come.
Okay, hi, my name is Vinicio. I am a GG student from Italy. My question is, in Europe, there are some countries, for example, Italy, but also Spain, which have an history more linked to political terrorism. For example, Spain with ETA movement of the Basque, and Italy especially with both far right and far left groups, sometimes even linked to an hypothesis with the secret services. Rather, they have a quite not so strong history of religious terrorism. For example, Spain, Italy doesn't have, Spain a little bit more, but so there is no history of religious terrorism. Is this because there are two different types of terrorism that are maybe one of the other is harder to fight, and maybe Italy, since have had a very strong history of political terrorism, as now the means to avoid other terrorist attack?
I mean, we in Italy, we've had terrorism. There has been terrorism in many countries in Europe. Just think about the IRA in Northern Ireland. But it's difficult. The comparison is very difficult because if you wish, in a way, our examples of terrorism, including the nationalism in the Basque Country of Northern Ireland, have a clear sort of limited scope. And Northern Ireland is the example because eventually, after 2 or 3 decades, it was a long time, with certainly many civilian victims, but the problem was solved. To the extent that one of the main issues during the Brexit negotiation was to keep that Northern Ireland border open so there is no resurgence of tensions. If we're dealing with in general, the Islamic terrorism, the ideology behind it, and in this case, I'm not thinking so much about Hamas, but about the Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. Think about the September 11, why attacking 2 skyscrapers in New York. That is very, very, very difficult to eradicate. Now, of course, would Hamas be what it is if the 2-state Palestinian solution had been achieved? That's an obvious issue that will have to be revisited after this crisis is finished. But comparing, say, our own terrorism in Italy, for instance, and Maurizio and I, we lived through those years. We remember very well. More or less every week there would have been some news about someone, individuals, being killed. But it was different in nature. And once that Sikh ideology behind the Red Brigade and other movements was basically uprooted, that was the end of it. We're talking about something much bigger than that, I'm afraid.
Yes, I mean, I'm more experienced with the Italian situation than with the others, for instance, in Spain or in Northern Ireland. There, in those situations, there was a political solution which was found, and therefore the terrorism was in some way, let's say, eradicated. But the political solution which was put in place had an important relevance to this effect. The terrorism that we had in Italy, as Stefano has said, had a different nature, and it could be defeated because they were isolated from the kind of popular support that they wanted to represent. Therefore, there was a unity in Italy of all the political forces, including those of the left or even of the extreme left, to isolate the terrorists, and this was the main reason of the success. In Italy, we had also previously in the 50s, in late 50s, 60s, some terrorism in Südtirol, Alto Adige, Südtirol. It was a situation similar to that of Northern Ireland, if you want. And there we had a political solution which was, I think, very satisfactory for both sides, and therefore terrorism was completely isolated. So we have to differentiate these 2 kinds of situations. But what is important is that the society can react to terrorism. In the Middle East, in the Arab world, I mean, we see that there is this strong feeling about the Palestinian issue, because, I mean, this is the most, let's say, relevant fact which is emerging. And therefore, perhaps a political solution on this can help to isolate terrorism. Of course, there are religious components, religious motivations, but quite often the religious motivations are connected to the frustration of the people. Of course, there is an ideology, but the spreading of this ideology is connected to what is the situation on the social situation on the ground. Any other question?
Put it in this way, just reinforcing what Marisa was saying, you have to drain the swamp. But in this case, the swamp is an ocean with many rivers, some fanatism, poverty, the Palestinian national, I mean, you name it. So, in South Tyrol, we found what is considered a model solution, but compared to others, was contained.
Okay. Any other question? Comments? You? Come. Please.
So, hi, my name is Roman. My question kind of comes back to what you said earlier. So you said that it's an ocean, right? You can drain it because it's too big. But then I wonder, what kind of practical solutions can we do to cut the flow of recruits of these terrorist groups? How do we isolate them, like concretely in practical terms? Thank you.
Obviously, it depends who are we. If we're talking about the international community in general, if you're talking about, I'll tell just one thing which we probably could do at national or European level is the more we integrate the immigrant communities that have element of the sympathy toward terrorism, the more also we identify and punish the terrorist element in it. At least it's a small piece of homework we can do. Obviously, this is not going to solve the wider problem, but at least it's like a small brick that we can do because we have the evidence that the less integrated are some communities, the more there is a risk that in those communities terrorism makes recruits. It is not a full, you can have a terrorist coming from, take Bin Laden, he's from a privileged family, etc. But integration, a lot of proselytism is done in prisons. So that's a huge work, but we can certainly do something in this.
I fully agree with what you said. And is there any other question? So if this is not the case, I think that we can end this session. Oh, okay. You want to add something?
No, I just wanted to make to add something to my previous question, because I appreciated your answer about how to react now and to prevent in future possible acts and how to isolate a mass. But I think my question was more about, I feel like a comment, I feel like especially in Europe, diplomacy in the context of this conflict has been almost completely absent in the last decades. We have seen in the past great political leaders taking positions in a much more balanced way, but and actually engaging in diplomacy. We've seen, like, especially in Italy, most leaders actually entertain relationship with the OLP, even when they still hadn't renounced armed resistance and were categorized as a terrorist group by the United States and other powers. So my question is, shouldn't we have, like, maybe wasn't that a better way of dealing with the conflict than what we're doing now? Like, isn't simply the condemnation and the support, or at least not condemnation of the violent retaliation, a worse option? Aren't we, like, the girl who had a question before was asking about how to reduce the number of people engaging in terrorism in the future. By not engaging in diplomacy with the other side and instead just looking at them as like barbarians who just kill because they do that with no reason, with no apparent reason, aren't we actually pushing more people to become terrorists in the future? Like, even from a very cynical point of view, is it useful for us?
You know, European diplomacy, American diplomacy have been very active in the past on this issue. The Barcelona process, which was started by some informal groups of the two sides, then developed to something that on which some countries build on it. And then we arrived to this with the support of the international community, especially of the Europeans and of the Americans. So then we had the quartet, we had all these activities. The Arab League also played this role, and so on. We have seen that in these issues since some time, we have been, let's say, we have been absorbed by other issues, you know. In other parts of the world, in Europe in particular, there has been the Russian assertiveness. In Asia, China, especially for the United States. Therefore, this issue was put aside. Now, it is important, I think, that after these events, and I think there are some signals about it, that we can re-engage a diplomatic activity in order to tackle the root problems which are there. Now, I think that your question was, can we establish also a dialogue in this perspective with Hamas? I think that this was the sense of your question in some way. Of course, it's very difficult because while also the Palestinian liberation organizations wanted the destruction of Israel, but their ideology was a nationalist and secular ideology, and they were ready to find a compromise. Here we're in front of a group who has an ideology which do not accept compromise, so it will be very difficult. Of course, on certain specific issue, there can be an indirect dialogue, as it is the case for the hostages, for instance. There is Qatar who is playing a role, Egypt is playing a role. But I don't think that the root problem can be solved with Hamas. It can be solved with others. With a Palestinian leadership, which is not there now, is not there also because the Israelis did not help to this Palestinian leadership to grow up. They were delegitimized in many ways. So we hope that also Israel can understand that it's useful for them to have a legitimate Palestinian leadership. They cannot pretend that this leadership can be a puppet of them. No, they have to accept that they will be very confrontational. But it is important that there is a counterpart that is not there now, practically.
The problem with Hamas now, it has crossed the bridge on 7th of October. It's obviously, as diplomats, mentally we're prepared to negotiate and deal with anyone. But, you know, it is very difficult. I mean, there are two steps, which, yeah, the first is defeating Hamas in the sense, at least decapitating what is the military wing, and then one has to roll up the sleeves and solve the lingering Palestinian question. But both things are much easier said than done. I think everybody would agree, but how?
Okay, I think we have answered to the questions. Okay. Other question? No? Okay, so we can end this session. So thank you very much for attending it. And we hope that it has been useful for you as it has been for us also, because this occasion allow us also to put in order our thinking. Okay? Thank you. Goodbye. Bye-bye.